After 6 generations, my guest is taking his family's wines biodynamic. Find out more in this episode of The Honest Pour.
Welcome to The Honest Pour with John Lennart, where we go beyond the bottle to connect you with the people and places that make each wine so unique.
Alto Adige, in Italy's northernmost reaches, is an often overlooked wine-producing area. Producing a wide range of grapes, from fruity Pinot Bianco to earthy Sylvaner, the region gets its influence from both Italy and its northern neighbors, Austria and Germany. Clemens Lageder of Eloise Lageder joined me at The Gauge, 24 South Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Clemens is the 6th generation of his family making wines in Alto Adige, and we talked about and tasted their intriguing wines. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about Alto Adige. Where exactly is it, and what makes it a unique growing region?
Alto Adige is actually the most northern region in Italy. It's a quite fun place because it's actually 100 years ago it was part of Austria. So, I mean, you know that Italy has completely a huge diversity of different regions. I mean, Piemonte is completely different to Sicily or Tuscany. And then there's a small place, it's one of the smallest wine growing region actually, Alto Adige, in a very northern parts and right next to the border to Switzerland and Austria. And actually the region is called also Südtirol in German. And that's why, because the region was actually 100 years ago part of Austria. In the First World War, Austria lost the war and Italy won the war. At least they flipped between the war, in the middle of the war. And then they cut Tyrol, this very famous Austrian region, into 2 pieces and gave the southern part, so Südtirol, South Tyrol, to Italy. And so now it's a very interesting region actually, because it's this melting pot of 2 different cultures. It's like you have this, the Italian influence, you have the Italian language, you have the Italian culture, like Italian food. But on the other side, you have also this very nice Austrian influence, this Austrian culture. We do speak German. Actually, nowadays, still 70% of people do speak German. And then you have also the Austrian food, like Schlutzkrapfen or Knödel or Wiener Schnitzel. So it's this beautiful area in the middle of the Dolomites, in the middle of the Alps, right up in the north, so where you have this mixture of 2 cultures.
And what are the classic varietals being grown in the region?
So it's funny because actually Alto Adige not a long time ago was known actually as red wine region, no? And we planted, about 40 years ago, it was planted a lot with Schiava. Schiava is this indigenous grape varietal, medium-bodied, nice freshness. So just 40 years ago, my father and friends of him started to dig out a little bit of these Schiava, of the red grape varietal, and plant much more white wine grape varietal, because Alto Adige is it's one of the warmest. It has really warm climate during the days. So Bolzano, the main town in Alto Adige, is really has this. It's one of the 5 hottest cities in Italy actually, compared to Palermo, to Rome, and other cities. But also it's getting this influence from the mountains. So it's really cool nights. So at around 6, 7, 8 p.m. the temperature drops. And that's why the region has perfect condition also for white wines. And that's why my father and others started 40 years ago to plant white grape varietals like Pinot Grigio, like Pinot Bianco, Chardonnay. But there's also Gewürztraminer, there's Sauvignon, there's Müller-Thurgau, there's a little bit of Riesling, Kerner. And so nowadays, actually, it's known as one of the best white wine regions in Italy, having also certain red grape varietals, like, as I mentioned before, Schiava, Lagrein, which is another indigenous grape varietal, or Cap Franc, Cap Sauvignon, or Merlot, Pinot Noir, which has a great potential actually there as well.
So a lot of varietals for one area,
enormous,
particularly for Italy, where it seems to be just a couple different varietals per area. In Alto Adige, there's this vast.
I think that's the beauty about Italy. It's right that every single region has its own small varietals, but that's the beauty about it, that it's so diverse, the whole region. I mean, not even by talking about culture, but also about wine varietals. I mean, Piemonte has its own indigenous grape varietal, Sicily has its own grape varietal, Puglia has its own indigenous grape varietal, and the same with Alto Adige. And yeah, that's true that there are many international grape varietals in Alto Adige as well, but they have a certain history there. like Chardonnay, for example, was planted since 200 years already. The same with Pinot Grigio, the same with other varietals.
You're sixth generation in your family in the winery. Give me a brief history of Alois Lageder.
So our winery started in 1823 with my great-great-grandfather, also Alois Lageder. When he started to trade at the very first beginning, his father started trading wine, and then he started to plant the first vines in Alto Adige. And so nowadays it's run by my father and me in fifth and sixth generation. So it's quite a long time. We are like in the very southern part of Alto Adige, so right next to the language border, actually, to the rest of Italy. We have about 50 hectares, about 125 acres of family-owned vineyards, that we converted in 2004 to biodynamics. Also, these beautiful collaborations with small farmers and all over the area, all over the region, Alto Adige. Think of that, the average of one farmer in Alto Adige who owns vineyards is about 2.5 acres, so quite small, and not everyone produces its own wine. But they rather prefer to do the whole viticulture, the work in the farming, but then selling the grapes to other neighbors. And these are the beautiful old tradition these are contracts, and they're not written down, but they're only by shaking their hands. And we get together with these farmers, about 90 is what we're working with, once or more often a year, but once a year we discuss about the price, and about after the harvest, we sit together, talk about the price, talk about the quantities, talk about if we were happy with the year or not, and then you decide every year again, over and over again, if you go on with the collaboration for another year or not. And so we have this collaboration with 90 different farmers in all over the area, and from about 250 acres. So I would say the total production would be from 350 acres.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You were brought up around wine, obviously, with generations of your family in the wine business, but it wasn't your first calling. Tell me how you got into the wine business.
That's right. You know that my parents, the good thing, I'm very happy about it. I mean, of course, I grew up with it, but they never gave me the pressure that I have to run the winery, the family winery. I mean, even if the tradition is so long, they always said to us kids, like also to my sisters, do whatever you feel like, do whatever you want to experience, or go your own path. And if you like, you come back and start working for the winery. And that's actually what I did at the beginning, because I was in school. I really loved philosophy and history and art. So, and that's why I decided at the very beginning to study sociology, so something completely different, but had nothing to do with wine. At the very end of the studies of the university, I started to work for our importer in Switzerland, and came back to this topic, came back to have the passion about wine. And afterwards, I started reading also about Rudolf Steiner, the founder of biodynamics. So I get to know about a little bit this aspect, farming in a very sustainable way, very traditional way, actually. This was actually a kickoff during my sociology study, working for the importer and reading all this stuff, that I decided afterwards to go to Geisenheim, to this viticulture school near Wiesbaden and Frankfurt in Germany, studying viticulture. And then afterwards I was heading to Burgundy, studying there winemaking or enology. And but there I decided to quit the university and rather preferred work for a winery, also for biodynamic winery. And then afterwards I went to New York, having just a short internship and our distributor, to get to know a little bit the market, to get in contact with the wine market, and especially also the US market, how it works. And I saw the difficulties and how big the competition is, actually. And that, it was good internship, a good experience. And then the last 2 years I've been in Luxembourg. Again, was an experience and had nothing or very little to do with wine. It was for a cooperative, a food cooperative, actually a biodynamic or organic food cooperative in Luxembourg I was working with, because I was interested to get to know a little bit more the holistic view of agriculture, not only viticulture, but also how in general organic or biodynamic agriculture would work. And then, last year I joined the company, and now I'm happy.
It's great. You came home after bringing these ideas of sustainability and biodynamic agriculture and viticulture with you, what did your dad think of this when he said, you know what, we're going biodynamic?
Well, actually, it wasn't me just starting with biodynamics. I mean, already my grandmother started with biodynamics, or let's say she was farming her garden in a biodynamic way. So she was pruning when the moon was in a certain position, and she was. Was
she burying the cow horn and all of that?
Absolutely.
She was.
Yeah. But I mean, only for her garden, her house garden, and we grew up with this, and my father grew up with this certain biodynamic thinking, and so we already in the mid of 90s in the family vineyard in the family vineyards, we started to try out certain biodynamic methods. And honestly, it wasn't a huge success, because if you work in the way we're always working, and on the other side you're trying to do experiments with biodynamics, it wouldn't work, because you need really to have to put the focus on it, because it's like getting rid of everything you've done before and thinking winemaking or thinking it from another perspective. But anyway, we did this first experiment in the mid-90s, and a couple of years afterwards, in 2004, already my father converted all the 120 acres slowly. He started at least with the 120 acres to biodynamic. Me coming back was actually not that I brought something new in the winery, but it was more something maybe from an other's perspectives again. And I mean, you're not getting biodynamic from one day to the other. It's always a process, and it's certain you need always to develop yourself. And that's what we also try to do now, going on and thinking biodynamically, or the biodynamics from a different perspective. It's not just bringing up preparation or digging the cow horns in the soil, but it's now what we started 3 years ago, this cooperation with dairy farmers, for example, now that they have nothing to do with wine, but these are dairy farmers that are in the mountains, for example, in the Alps, and we take their cows, for example, or we rent the cows for winter time, and we bring them down in the valley in our vineyards where the climate is much more warmer, and where they find grass even during the winter time, and they eat the whole grass. It's a certain organic fertilizer, because we don't use any chemical fertilizer, and we don't use any pesticides and herbicides. So their manure is a certain organic fertilizer, and then after the winter time and in springtime, when the plants start shooting again, we bring them up again in the mountains. And so it's a win-win situation for us, but also for this dairy farmer, because he slowly he can save money during the winter time, because he doesn't need to buy any food for the cows, and so slowly he can grow. And that's a little bit the thing what we are starting to do in the last years, to really think biodynamic as the vision of biodynamic is just having or trying to build up this holistic and close farm, but we just can't put out the vines and put in cows, because if not, we would be broken after two years. And it's not the point. I mean, it's still winemaking is still, we know, and what we are going to do in the next future year. But it's trying to go or start this certain collaborationships and trying to creating this closed farm on a larger scale.
And what have the results been?
Extremely good. I mean, I have to admit, the results that we would have never expected. Talking just now from not only from the biodynamics, but just from this collaboration we have with this dairy farmer, is that all of a sudden we had, like before, we had problems with a certain plant underneath the vines. It was massive. It was really dominating. And all of a sudden, having the cows in the vineyards after certain years, we had much more different flowers, different plants. There was a certain diversity. There was, I don't know how, I have no idea, I have no explanation for that, but really interesting to see the diversity growing, using or bringing in animals in the vineyards, and not only having this monoculture of vines, no?
When you walk the vineyards, do they feel different? Is there a different vibe than there was in the vineyard? You know, I was in a vineyard in Sonoma County that's just changed over to biodynamics, and the woman touring us through said in the past 5 years, you could now feel that our vineyard is alive compared to the vineyard next door that's not practicing biodynamics. You can just feel the life in the vineyard.
Going through the vineyards, I see a huge difference, and especially after, like as you said, after like 4 or 5 years, you start seeing these differences, and you see also how the vines start reacting to certain difficult conditions. Like if it rains, the vines start being much more, certain self-protection, and that's true. I mean, also that in the biodynamics, in the middle of the rows, as you don't use any herbicides anymore, you try to bring certain seeds out, certain flowers in the middle of the rows. So of course there's a huge living life going on, actually, no? And finally you have butterflies back again, I mean, or bees back again, no? I mean, the bees wouldn't be attracted to vines because the flowering or the blossom of the vine is quite unattractive for bees. But finally having other plants in the middle of the rows, you create a certain diversity, you create a certain habitus for these different insects, not only outside but also in the soil. And I would say definitely there's another life going on in vineyards.
What wines do you make?
We have about 75% white wines. So the most important wines are for sure Pinot Grigio, Pinot Bianco, Chardonnay. There's Gewürztraminer, there's Müller-Thurgau. I think in Alto Adige have extremely beautiful potential for Pinot Noir as red grape varietal, because in the Dolomites we have the Dolomites, you have to think about it, where millions of years it was all flooded by sea, and now through the last hundred millions of years, there were these mountains that were built up through these fossils, no, and now it's full of chalk, full of limestone, and that's a perfect soil actually for Pinot Noir. And now also the climate is great, because also even though we have quite warm days, we are getting this influence from the mountains, from the Dolomites. In the afternoon already, it starts cooling down, chills down, and then you get certain balance to the Pinot Noir. You get a certain freshness to the Pinot Noir, the certain feminine character, what we always aiming for also for the Pinot Noir. We in our family winery don't try to make the Pinot Noirs as fresh, flushy, fruity, or do you say fresh fruit? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or overpowering, but they always should be more on the elegancy, more delicate. The finesse is extremely important. And I think you have certain good condition for Pinot Noir, absolutely. And then, as I said, you have indigenous grape vine like Schiava, Lagrein, but also Cabernet. It depends. That's the beauty about Alto Adige, that you have so many different soil types, so many different exposures, so many different altitudes. I mean, vineyards are going from starting at 250 meters, so about 600 feet, and going up to, 1,300 meters, so about 3,000 feet. So the diversity is big. And that's one of the biggest advantages we have working with these small farmers, because then we have the property, or our vineyards, the majority, let's say, in the southern parts of Alto Adige. But through these collaborations with these farmers, we can really go to more northern parts or more western parts or higher altitudes and find the right spot for the right grape vines. For example, Müller-Thurgau is a grape vine that it's grown in a certain area. No, we don't have any vineyards there, but we have fantastic these old partners that they have their vineyard there, and they giving us their grapes. So trying to find the right spot for the right grape varietal. Or Sauvignon, for example. No, instead of Sauvignon, always prefers a certain.
Sauvignon?
No, Sauvignon Blanc. Sorry. So Sauvignon, for example, always, instead of preferring the limestone, it always goes better on the porphyry, volcanic porphyry. So we have a spot in our area in Alto Adige called Terlano as well, as a small area that is very famous for the Sauvignon Blanc. So because it has this soil type, so trying to go there, finding partners, finding small farmers who are planting this certain grape vine and selling us the fruit that they have varied.
Let's taste some wine.
Let's taste some wines, yeah, absolutely. Start with the Pinot Bianco. So the Pinot Bianco is called Haberle. So this first wine we try is Haberle from the terroir selection. So it's a vineyard on a high altitude vineyard, quite a high altitude vineyard, about 500 meters, so about 1,600 feet high. And that's what's so special about the Pinot Bianco in Alto Adige. You probably know Pinot Bianco from Alsace and other areas from France, also from the northern parts of Italy, like Lombardy or Friuli. But the difference in Alto Adige is that since ever we always tried to find very high quality vineyards where we can plant this grape vine. Many other regions, the Pinot Bianco is seen as like a medium quality or like a second quality wine. But I think the beauty about it is if you're going higher up, the Pinot Bianco doesn't have this aromatics like a Gewürztraminer or Riesling, but it has this beautiful structure, this beautiful palate, this beautiful fresh, crisp structure.
There's a citrus and a little bit of kind of stone fruit, good minerality, great acid. Actually, a little teeny bit, I just noticed, kind of almost like that, it's very late in the back, a little bit of that kind of petrol like Riesling gets. Just a little teeny bit of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, it's nice wine, good food wine.
Thank you, yeah. That's the good thing about the Pinot Bianco. It's a really good, nice food wine, actually. Period. And that's actually, in general, what we're always trying to do with the wines. We never want to make this too full-bodied wines. They always should have a certain freshness, a certain acidity, that you can pair them very well with food, actually. So the second wine will be the Porra. Porra is a Pinot Grigio, 2014. Also terroir selection. It's landed more in the valley, so about lower vineyards, because the Pinot Grigio always needs a certain warmer climate to get a little bit this ripeness. Also 100% limestone. And the thing what we do here is the half of it we keep in stainless steel, where it ferments and stays on the yeast in stainless steel, and the other half we keep on the large cask.
That's a great expression of what Pinot Grigio can be. First of all, it starts off. It's got that silvery color that Pinot Grigio always has, and it's really really nice. But there's a concentration to the kind of gold. It's like gold and silver together in the glass.
Well, that's a pity a little bit that Pinot Grigio is known as sometimes a little bit watery or a neutral grape vine. But I think if you do it right and then sometimes also extending a little bit the skin contact, or you can have beautiful.
You have a little skin contact on this?
On this 2014, not on 2015 we will. But we don't release it. We will release it in a couple of months.
This is a terrific example of Pinot Grigio.
But it can be so. It can be a very interesting grape vine. It is a very interesting grape vine, in my point of view. You just need a certain condition, a certain limestone, that you get a certain expression of minerality.
Definite minerality, and the little bit of wood gives it a little bit of backbone, a little bit of structure at the end. What's the retail price on this?
Porra is about 25.
Delicious wine for that.
Thanks a lot.
Especially for the price. You could certainly do a lot worse for $24 a bottle when it comes to Pinot Grigio. That's a great wine.
So the next wine is going to be our Chardonnay Löwengang. What is 100% Chardonnay. It's called Löwengang. Löwengang is the name of the estate where our cellar is, or where the whole building actually is, an estate from the 15th century. Löwengang means, and here you see again the German or the Austrian influence, Löwengang means lion's walk. Löwe, it's the lion, and Gang is the walk, actually. Vintage is 2012. It's a Chardonnay that it was actually the first white wine out of Alto Adige that was had an international reputation, as my father was a good friend of Robert Mondavi. And when Robert Mondavi came once to Alto Adige, they wanted to build up a joint venture, what at the end never happened. But anyway, so Robert Mondavi we were actually using only large cask for Chardonnay. And then Robert Mondavi had discussions with my father, and my father said, look, large cask is the best way to vinify our Chardonnay here. And then Robert Mondavi questioned it and said, why you never did some experience? You never tried barrels. And so this was the first time that my father actually, knowing it from Burgundy, where we're used to it, and so he started to try barrels, and mainly using old barrels, used barrels. So we did barrels for the certain structure, for the soft tannins, but we always want to reduce the oakiness. Always needs to have a certain savory And,
this is definitely a savory Chardonnay. It's certainly not California Chardonnay. Very, very savory, nice apple flavor, great minerality of that wine.
That's important. That's what you really like about the Chardonnays or also the Pinot Grigio in Alto Adige, that they have the conditions to get this. I think the retail price is about 48. So let's change and do the rosé.
It's rosé season. Everyone's going crazy
Like
drinking rosé right now. Now it's no longer season. Now it's year round. Everyone wants rosé year round.
Really?
Yeah.
So this actually is a good rosé for the whole year because it's, as you can see already, it's a little bit darker colored, darker colored than many others.
You're pretty extracted, yeah.
Yeah, the reason why is because it's a Lagrein rosé. Lagrein is this indigenous grape varietal. Lagrein has a really dark color naturally, even though if you just keep this rosé or these grapes or the must just in a short time on the skin, it already gives a certain color to the wine. And that's why it's a little bit dark colored, or darker colored than maybe some salmon. Mm-hmm. But it's a very interesting wine because Lagrein also has always this a little bit higher acidity compared to Cab or Merlot. And that gives the certain freshness again to the wine. Because
it's an indigenous grape, was rosé traditionally made from Lagrein, or is this something new that's being...
No, this is actually, there are two ways of making, it has a certain tradition, a very long tradition actually, to make Lagrein Kretzer, what is nothing else than Lagrein rosé, but we call it Lagrein Kretzer. But it's a very long tradition very, very old tradition to make rosé out of Lagrein.
Pretty floral smell. Great texture.
That's actually was just released, 2015.
Great kind of fresh strawberry, but it's not playful. It's a little more serious about itself than some rosés can be, kind of just fruity and playful. And there's that structure, there's that acidity and that minerality that gives it structure, and it's a little more serious rosé.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, in a good way. I don't know if you think that's bad.
No, I think that's in a good way. I always don't want to have much more serious wines and just. I mean, they need a certain character.
I mean, you could certainly be very happy on a nice summer day with that on your porch.
Absolutely.
It's a little more than that.
That's the point about this rosé. I mean, it has a certain character, but it's not just,
Great. Well, we brought a lot of wines to taste. What's next?
The next actually is a Lagrein, but not a rosé, but a red Lagrein. Lagrein, again, the same grape varietal. It's a Reserva, 2012. Because for me, Lagrein is, as I said before, it has always a little bit this high acidity. It has, if it's settled down a little bit, very smooth tannins, but at the very beginning it can be very rough. It can be very difficult also. And that's why we always decide, or we love a little bit more into Lagrein when it's a little bit more settled down, aged. Mm-hmm. That's why the current release actually is 2012.
And this is the Conus bottling.
The name is Conus from this Lagrein, because interestingly, normally Lagrein is planted in very hot areas on sandy soil. What we did here, instead of planting in Bolzano, this main town in Alto Adige, we planted it in the southern part, where we, instead of sandy soil, we have limestone and a little bit cooler climate. And the interesting thing is that it keeps, for sure, the characteristics of Lagrein, but it changes a little bit. It loses a little bit this dirtiness that Lagrein can have.
It's got a super earthy nose.
That's the typical thing about Lagrein.
Very earthy.
And interestingly, Lagrein is always related to Syrah. So Syrah is about the cousin, and the father of Lagrein is Teroldego, what you may know from Trentino.
Mm-hmm. Good acid, good structure. A little bit tannin, huh?
Yeah,
a little tannin.
Still.
And how does Lagrein age?
I would say that's interesting, because with the component, like with the characteristics, like having high acidity and also some tannins, you would think of Lagrein aging like 20, 30 years. Interestingly is that Lagrein, I would say the peak it has about 5 to 10 years. I always love it when it's like 10 years old. It's fantastic. But then slowly can drop. I would say about between 5 and 15 years.
Right. Which is a good time. I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Why do we have to wait 20 years to drink our wine?
Not everyone is made for age.
And what's this?
That's the Grafus. Grafus 2010, the vintage. Grafus, it's a Pinot Noir. It's a farm wine, so from one of our Grand Crus, single vineyard owned by my grandfather, actually, but the father of my mother. It actually was the last family-owned vineyard we converted to biodynamics in 2013, because he always said he was very hard to convince about biodynamics. I mean, he's a lawyer. He never really worked in a vineyard, but at least not in this vineyard so much in the last years. And so it was really hard to convince at his age, because he always said, leave me alone with biodynamics. You can do it after me. But finally, in 2013, we convinced him, and we're happy that nowadays every single family-owned vineyard is biodynamic converted. And so it's a Pinot Noir that is, again, grown on a very nice limestone. But also here, I think you can see that it's a Pinot Noir from a northern part of Italy. It's not a Pinot Noir from where you have this, again, this flashy, fruity, but it's much more, or what we aim for is having much more feminine character, actually.
It's definitely that not that voluptuous, in-your-face fruit. It's all more integrated. It's fresh cherry is there, but then it gives them the kind of leather and spice box, and again, the minerality is really elevated.
It's also we keep it about 12 or 15 months in barrel, and then a couple of years bottle aged. And when we're using barrels, same as with the Chardonnay Löwengang, we always try to reduce the new oak. So it gets a certain spiciness, of course, from the barrels, but again, we need it for the soft tannins, for the structure, to soften up the wine, to round it up around it, but not to really make it too oaky. And that's what we are looking for.
You're making a lot of wine. You're making a lot of different wines.
Yeah, that's true.
But you're making them with sort of a small production sensibility and care. How do you maintain that?
I think the most important thing is having good people working with you, and that's for sure. I mean, changing to biodynamics, you can do it. I mean, if you would work by yourself in the vineyard, easy. But if you have a certain size, I mean, and we have 50 people working with us. The hardest thing for sure is to motivate and to convince people. The same thing we see when we're trying to convince our farmers. And I think that's the point about it. Trying to have really, really good persons working with you, understanding that they always need to understand. First of all, they need to know the values of the winery, the goals and the visions. Then you always need persons that having certain similar visions and aiming the certain similar goals. And I think that's a little bit the biggest challenge we're facing. It's not, many people always say, changing to biodynamics or not using any herbicides or not pesticides or not using any chemical fertilizer, that the plant actually would have difficulties. In my opinion, that's completely not true. It's always, the plant gets used to it immediately. After, as I said, after 4 or 5 years, you already see the difference. It's the hardest thing to convince us, or the hardest thing to get not only convinced, but that knows to deal with it, is the human being.
Good farming, good team, good wine.
That's the point, yeah.
Yeah. We didn't talk about production and pricing on a few of these. The Lageder Rosé, what's the price on that?
The Lageder Rosé is about $18.
Okay.
$18, yeah.
That's well priced.
The Cornus Lagrein is about 30, and Crafus Pinot Noir is about 50.
So all reasonably priced, reasonable $50, but in the grand scheme of the world of Pinot Noir, $50 Pinot Noir isn't ridiculous. All well-priced wines, they're really high quality. Thanks for joining me. Clemens Lageder of Alois Lageder. While you're a large production wine, sort of a large production winery, your wines, like I said, are made with a small production, attention to detail, and sensibility.
Thank you very much, John. It was a great pleasure being here and talk a little bit about the wines and discuss with you about the winery.
For John's tasting notes on the wines from this episode, go to www.thehonestpourpod.com. Make sure you catch every episode by subscribing to The Honest Pour with John Lenart at iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Play Store. Also, be sure to like us on Facebook at The Honest Pour with John Lenart and follow us on Twitter at The Honest Pour. This has been The Honest Pour with John Lenart. Music by Kevin MacLeod.